Luigi Mangione, a former prep school valedictorian and Ivy League engineer, was arrested this morning at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, about 280 miles west of the murder scene in New York City. Police say he was carrying multiple fake IDs and a document allegedly detailing anger at corporate America.
And especially to the customer at the McDonald's that seen something, says something to the McDonald's employee that called 911 and reported this individual inside of their restaurant.
On the face of it, 26-year-old Luigi Mangione is an atypical perpetrator, handsome, well-educated, well-heeled, and from a wealthy, well-to-do family. One doesn't often see someone with this much potential throw it all away, certainly not in the way that he has done it. The moment Luigi pulled the trigger, he didn't only take away Brian Thompson's life, he lost his own. But the reality is, Luigi gave up on his own life months before. Why? How did his family and those around him not notice or not do anything? How did they not notice him becoming overwhelmed by something as seemingly simple as anxiety? And why did he go the route that he did based on his own anxiety? How did that happen?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. If those close to him didn't notice the signs of a young man unraveling, something his profile on X actually touches on, defenses of toxic masculinity, violence as agency, and rationalizing murderous violence as revolutionary and right and necessary. Just look at these posts. Well, he seemed to know that his mental health had become quite rickety, and the cops, when they confronted him in McDonald's, saw it for themselves firsthand. When Altoona police officers asked Luigi Mangione if he'd been to New York recently, this was at the McDonald's yesterday morning, he became visibly nervous, even started shaking. That's a very different character to the masked vigilante confidently moving through New York, purposefully and brazenly targeting his victim and then fleeing the scene while leaving behind cryptic clues. Unmasked, Luigi's not nearly as strong as he seemed with the mask on. So what was his motive? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, I have said in the past that the key to motive often has to do with our symbolic frameworks. What do I mean? Well, these frameworks may have very little to do with objective reality, and they often do have very little to do with reality. And that is quite a cause for concern. Imagine if someone out there is disconnected from reality and they are operating within their own reality. That could end up in some kind of catastrophe. I mean, one person's symbolic reality can appear to be complete nonsense to literally everybody else. But mark my words, it's very, very real to each person, and you ignore these frameworks at your peril. What is your symbolic reality? Do you know? We can clearly see Luigi's symbolic framework taking center space on his profile on X. His back issue had become central to his identity, and that does look like some very serious back problems. And so despite getting a first-class education and being particularly literate with regard to computer science, what does he do with it? He 3D prints a gun, makes a few fake IDs, and goes rogue on his own self-made first-person shooting mission. And here's what the firearm and fake ID on the suspect looked like. It's interesting that the Mark Rosario ID was found with, the same one he used to check into a New York hostel, was issued not that long ago, mid-June this year. This suggests the planning and premeditation goes back about 6 months. 6 months of cautious, meticulous planning and all of it unraveled in barely 6 days. While Luigi seems to think of himself as smart, he made some incredibly stupid mistakes, such as holding onto the fake ID that linked him to the hostel, as well as the ghost gun and manifesto. When they confronted him, he literally had the murder weapon with him and a manifesto basically admitting the crime written in his own handwriting on him. And there were actually some people who left comments saying, "How do you know that this is the perpetrator?" Anyway, why did he have the manifesto on him? I mean, it's basically like carrying around a confession letter. Why are you fleeing the scene with a confession letter, with a manifesto? And I think the answer is possibly that his survival instinct after killing Brian Thompson kicked in. When he saw Brian Thompson die, he felt, well, I want to live. And he decided against gifting law enforcement additional evidence, such as handwriting that could aid them in his apprehension. He wanted to get away with it. So when the cops took his ID and ran a check in the McDonald's, it immediately came back as fake. When asked to explain himself and why he'd used a fake name, he said, "I clearly shouldn't have." Yeah, clearly you shouldn't shoot people on the sidewalk either. Now, when Luigi was arraigned in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania yesterday, we saw the same weaseling cowardice as what we saw on the sidewalk in Manhattan. Sorry if I'm not part of the crowd that thinks of him as this folk hero. And I have to say, if you're part of the true crime community and you've gotten the same feeling, then I really don't know where your mind has been all of this time. Luigi lied about the $8,000 in cash he had on him, saying that it was planted on him. That's what I mean by weaseling cowardice. So you do something, or you're not going to stand up for what you did and say why you did it and be honest about why you did it. Because if you really back yourself, you would do that. But to not do that, to flee the scene and then lie about it, that is weaseling cowardice. That's not very heroic. The fact that he had a Faraday bag capable of blocking his cell phone signal, he explained that the bag was waterproof, and he disputed his own criminal sophistication. But you would imagine a computer science grad would know about something like that and would be criminally sophisticated in that area, wouldn't you? By the way, lying is the first step on the road to criminality. Not all liars are murderers, but all murderers are liars. And Luigi is no exception. Lying starts when we lie to ourselves, and criminality gets real traction when lying becomes blaming, and we start to believe and worship the god of blame. That's how we become the victims of our own stories and perpetrators of our own falsehoods. Perpetrating falsehoods later becomes perpetrating. Luigi, by the way, also seems to have become sucked into his own confirmation bias. The trouble was he didn't have a very smart little lawyer internally calling the shots, but a criminal that he listened to. He could have chosen not to listen to that. He could have chosen a different path. Through his social media, one does get a strong sense of Luigi wanting to matter, wanting to mean something, wanting to stand out. A lot of young people feel that way. It can be agonizing when you're not, while a lot of the people around you are living their happily ever after in a spectacular way, almost in a fairy tale way. Meanwhile, you are going down some kind of path into some kind of nightmare. At 26 years old, possibly unemployed and going nowhere, bummed out about his back and isolating himself. That's something he also seemed to do deliberately. People reached out to him and he didn't answer their calls. Well, what was he doing? Well, he seemed to be coming up with a mission that he thought would fix the world, but really it was to fix his private sense of lack, of emptiness, of going nowhere slowly, while his life, his youth, slowly slipped away. And so that is what he was fixating on. Those things, not what he had, what he could be grateful for. And so his mission was to find someone to blame for his own self-fulfilling, or is that self-unfulfilling symbolic construct. My impression of Luigi is of a smart but entitled young man who wasn't very resilient at dealing with a major life event. And guess what? Psychological resilience is your responsibility. If you're going to spend all your time being a victim, you're not going to develop that resilience. And that is your choice. That is the path you've taken. And that's your responsibility, right? And so as soon as you do that, you struggle to deal with a major life event, and your way out of that is to blame someone. Well, then that lacking of agency only gets worse. And so he eventually finds the only way to get out of this impasse is to cheat his way out of it. Well, did he succeed? Look at these pictures of him. Has he succeeded in his scheme? Has he succeeded in starting a revolution? Or has he succeeded in putting himself in a cage and becoming even more down and out than he already was? Now, putting himself in a cage is something he did long ago in terms of his own psychology, in terms of his own thought process. Whose fault is it that he shot Brian Thompson? It's not the CEO's fault. It's not his back's fault. It's not the fault of mental illness or anxiety.
The problem is choice.
And Luigi made a series of bad decisions, bad choices, culminating in the hooded figure who'd gone over to the dark side. Every single little decision Luigi did along the way was his own confirmation bias. When he had the freedom to be, to do, to respond in a myriad of other ways, of other more functional, effective, life-affirming, and more practical ways. So what was his motive? Luigi wanted payback for his back problems. In a word, revenge. A kind of sadistic revenge. I'm suffering, I'm feeling pain, I'm going to make you suffer, and I'm going to take pleasure in that. I'm going to feel better if you suffer. And so he was suffering. The suffering he was enduring was certainly noteworthy and worth sympathizing over. But the way he responded to it isn't worth any sympathy or any compassion whatsoever. He decided Brian Thompson was going to be the one to pay the piper. And I believe the attempted assassination of Trump by Thomas Crooks in July this year, 6 months ago, emboldened Luigi in some way. But I don't think he got the idea from that. I don't think that directly or specifically inspired him, because he applied for those fake passports a month before, in June. So clearly the criminal psychology was already brewing, already ripe, before the Thomas Crooks incident. You must see it like this. Thomas Crooks didn't do something and Luigi Mangione got an idea. Luigi was already in a situation where he was blaming the world, suffering, struggling with his own mental health, and then thoughts crept in, and confirmation bias did the rest. Question: when Luigi sits in his cell, who does he blame? Himself, or the McDonald's worker who recognized his face and called him in? That person who took responsibility and action is the real hero of this story. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.